turn it next to Alan Palm, who's director of 350 Mass Organizing's Better Future Project.
Thanks, Emily, and thanks all for having me. My name is Alan Breen Palm, and I use he, him pronouns, and I serve as the Director of Organizing for 350 Mass, which is supported by the Better Future Project. 350 Mass is member-led, we're statewide, and we're grassroots, and we're organizing to address the climate crisis. And I also serve on the steering committee for a relatively new coalition called the Mass Renews Alliance that brings together labor unions, social and environmental justice groups, youth organizations, climate and environmental groups to build power and push for policies that address the interlocking crises of climate change, racial and economic injustice by addressing the basic needs of people right now. And so I'm really grateful to Mass Peace Action for inviting me to speak with you all. I'm glad to be in a setting and amongst folks who recognize the grave injustice of endless war. And the connections between war and climate change are profound and, in my view, largely unrecognized. As Lindsay just referenced, the US Department of Defense is the world's largest institutional user of petroleum and the single largest producer of greenhouse gases in the world, and has been mostly left out of even accounting from international climate agreements, non-binding though they are. And so we will not stabilize the climate while continuing endless wars. The United States is also the largest historical emitter of greenhouse gases and has played a role in obstructing any internationally binding agreements for many decades. And it is with that context, like a relatively low bar on climate action, that I'm going to give some remarks about the Biden administration's climate plans. And so we have seen parts of the Build Back Better plan manifest through executive orders in January. So significantly, the executive orders from the Biden administration in January called for the US to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. They canceled the Keystone XL pipeline. They created several new positions. One focused on climate on the National Security Council, held by John Kerry. One within the White House offices, held by Gina McCarthy. It added some significant steps to enforce environmental justice protections. So those are provisions for communities who have borne the historical and present disproportionate burden of pollution, and that consistently tracks along lines of race and class for bearing that disproportionate burden. And they reinstated a number of Obama-era regulations, as well as other important steps. But I want to focus on the more recent actions that have been referenced earlier by the Biden administration's introduction of the American Jobs Plan that calls for the $2.3 trillion over 8 years or $2.7 trillion over 10 years to be invested in jobs and infrastructure. And again, we do anticipate another bill from the Biden administration, probably the Americans Families Plan, coming really soon. So I'm going to get into some of the specifics of the American Jobs Plan, but here's the takeaway, is that $2.7 trillion over 10 years is not nearly enough to address the crises we face. For some context, the recent stimulus package, the American Rescue Plan, is $1.9 trillion over just 1 year. According to the IPCC, so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we have fewer than 10 years to make significant reductions in global greenhouse gas emissions to avoid the runaway greenhouse effects that will make stabilizing the climate nearly impossible if we don't make significant global greenhouse gas reductions in the next 10 years. And so with that context, the American Jobs Plan includes only I'll talk about some of the other categories, but starting with housing. And most homes in the United States, as well as here in Massachusetts, are powered by and heated by burning oil or gas on site, right? And most of them are older and leaky, so we need to fix our homes as part of addressing climate change. The American Jobs Plan includes upgrading only 2 million of the 140 million housing units in the United States over the next 10 years. Just 2 million of the 140 million housing units. For some comparison, the coalition that I referenced earlier, the Mass Renews Alliance, has introduced state policy in Massachusetts that proposes to retrofit 1 million homes in Massachusetts alone over the next 10 years, which is not radical. It is actually in fulfillment of our state's existing laws. there are existing climate laws. So it is necessary to meet the goals that we already have. And that's kind of a consistent pattern, is that there are, both on the state level and the federal level, is that there are these spoken and even written commitments to significant goals, but there are under-resourced plans in order to meet them. So the American Jobs Act is it's not bad. It does many good and important things. It calls for replacing all the lead pipes across the United States. It references the PRO Act, which contains really important and strong labor protections. Deborah Weinstein earlier, to start off the call, spoke to many of the good and important things about the American Jobs Plan. It is just on its own not a serious answer to the existential threats that we face. However, as Rep. Presley would remind us, it is our job as activists, as organizers and movement builders to expand the realm of the possible. So what does the expanded realm of the possible look like on the level of a federal recovery plan? Well, it is called the THRIVE Agenda. So some of you all may have heard of this. So THRIVE is an acronym that stands for Transform, Invest, Heal, and Renew by Investing in a Vibrant Economy. And it is a plan to invest $10 trillion over the next 10 years in jobs and infrastructure, with at least 50% of that investment going towards frontline communities. So I'm going to do a quick comparison. It would probably have been beneficial for me to have created slides for this, but I didn't. So here we go. So the American Jobs Plan would create about 5 million jobs over the next 10 years. And given that there are 15 million people out of work in the United States, the Biden administration's plan would leave 2 out of the 3 currently unemployed people jobless. The THRIVE Act, by comparison, would create 15 million jobs. We'll look at some of the other sectors. So in regard to energy, the American Jobs Plan invests $469 billion. And this is 17% of what the THRIVE plans would invest in clean energy, leaving a gap of about 2.6 million jobs. And that's largely due to low investments in the electric grid and low investments in expanding renewable energy in the American Jobs Plan in comparison to the THRIVE Act. In transportation, the American Jobs Plan invests $621 billion. That is 32% of what the THRIVE Act would invest, leaving a jobs gap of about 1.9 million due to low investments in surface transportation and electric vehicles and rail. In buildings, the American Jobs Plan invests about $378 billion. This is 40% of the THRIVE amount, and even the THRIVE amount is not adequate. But that difference, the 40% difference between the American Jobs Plan and the THRIVE Act equates to about 785,000 jobs. To go through a couple other categories, in land, the American Jobs Plan invests $31 billion. This is 12% of what is represented in the THRIVE Act, leaving an annual gap of $22 billion and nearly 350,000 jobs over the course of the next decade. And these are due to low investments and plugging orphaned oil and gas wells and brownfield and Superfund cleanup. In agriculture, the American Jobs Plan has virtually no investments in agriculture. A couple of the sectors that are a little closer between the American Jobs Plan and THRIVE are in water. And so the American Jobs Plan invests $111 billion in water. This is 34% of what is in the THRIVE Act, leaving a gap of about 270,000 jobs. The American Jobs Plan invests $100 billion in broadband. This is 29% of the THRIVE amount, leaving a gap of 225,000 jobs. And finally, for my list, which is not exhaustive, the American Jobs Plan invests $400 billion in care, which is great, but it is only 52% of what is in the THRIVE Act, leaving a gap over the decade of 785,000 jobs. So The takeaway to this is that the American Jobs Plan is good. It does some important things, but we need to push and expand the realm of what is possible right now. The Thrive Act represents a lot of what that expanded vision could be. It is rooted in frontline leadership from Indigenous communities, environmental justice groups, labor unions, and many others. It would create 15 million jobs. These are good family-sustaining jobs over the next decade, and it would cut climate pollution in half by 2030. So that is it for my presentation, but I would leave you all with the ask to please contact your congressperson soon, next week, and ask them to co-sponsor the Thrive Act. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Alan, for laying out the flaws in a lot of these current plans and how they don't even come close to addressing what we need them to. So a lot of work to be done, and I'm glad that you've given us something to do, which is to contact our reps about the Thrive Act.